Sunday, family. Happy Rookie Reset Fun Sunday. I am Fun Day Sunday, especially today. Guys, I am so excited. Okay, gotcha. Okay, I am so excited to have one of my favorite teachers here today. But just let's set a little context first before we dive into the Rookie Reset. For those of you wondering that what the heck is a Rookie Reset? It would be Sunday night just like this, except I would be stressed. See, I don't even want to say the word, Miss Wildman, I would be stressed the hell out because, because I could not manage my class and I couldn't figure out this teaching thing. You know what I mean? And so I was stressed out. So the whole purpose of this Rookie Reset is to hopefully help you as a new teacher, provide you with tools and strategies to help you in that first year. And so we like to bring people that are crushing it in the educational space and share their expertise and hopefully help you out. So I'm so excited for our guest today, Miss Kelli Wildman-Hefner. And she was my 11th grade African-American literature teacher. And just to set a little context on Miss Wildman, let me just tell you guys, I had no idea what I was in store for. I think you froze there, Miss Wildman.
Did I?
Well, I don't know. It's just on your video. I don't see your face.
Okay. All right. I'm back.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. So
Okay.
Let me just tell you guys a quick story. Okay, I signed up in 10th grade for African American Lit. So I'm in my 11th grade. I'm going the first day of school. You got your first day outfit on. You're feeling right and tight. And so I walk in. It's African American Lit class. And so at the door greeting us is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed lady. And I'm like, you teaching me African-American Lit? Like, we were straight up cracking jokes. We were like, how's she teaching us African-American Lit? But
actually, y'all said, hey, we've got a sub.
Yes, I think, which I just couldn't believe. I was like, how's she teaching me about some African-American Lit? But guys, when I tell you, this was one of the best class that I've ever taken. I mean, we talked about race, we had politics. I mean, it was just, we looked at the text, like we did all those things. And it was one of the best class that I ever had. Miss Wildman, actually, you're in my book. You're in the very first chapter in my book. Yes, she was just so authentic, so real, and one of my favorite teachers. And it was such a dynamic experience. So I said, I need to bring her on and just hear your expertise. And did you know, guys, this was her very first year. And her first year was not like mine. So I definitely need to learn from her. So thank you, Miss Wildman. I'm so excited to have you. I know it was a really long intro, but I just need to let people know, like, this is why she's one of my favorites. She's just really cool. One of my favorite teachers, and I'm so excited to have you there. So would you tell us a little bit about who you are, what do you do? Could you introduce yourself to the crew,
Sure.
the people that's watching right now?
Well, I am Kelli Wildman-Hefner. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I had really great English teachers when I was in high school, and they taught me the value of words. And so I decided that I would major in creative writing when I went to college, did that for 4 years. And then I thought, well, I'll take a year off and figure out what I want to do.
Right.
Do I want to go to grad school to be a teacher, or do I want to go to law school? And so I opted to work a little bit, or at least that's what I thought I was going to do. And I got a phone call and said, hey, would you come and be our graduate assistant and go ahead and start in education. And I felt like I've never heard the audible voice of God, but that was kind of close to it, because I felt like that was my mission field. I went into, when I student taught, it was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And then when I transitioned to Kirby High School, the Kirby Wildcats,
we're the Cougars.
The Cougars.
We were the Cougars. Yes, Miss Wildman. Yes.
I cannot believe I messed up on that.
Yes, Kirby crew, y'all get her.
In my mind. The Kirby Cougars.
Yes.
But when I went in for my interview with Mr. James Boyd, who was the principal, he said, I had never been one that made a decision really quickly about my life. I did it very prayerfully. And so I came up from Baton Rouge, and I was talking to my mom. She made the trip with me, and I said, Mom, what if they asked to make a decision? And she said, let's pray and ask God to give you wisdom and peace. And so when I walked up the sidewalk at Kirby, I knew he was going to ask me to accept the position, and I knew that I would do that. And
Right.
so he and I met and discussed me teaching British Lit and African American Lit. And it wasn't just, because I was a warm body.
Right.
When I did my master's program, I really focused on literature that had a positive relationship between African American and Caucasian American characters, because I felt like if we're ever going to move forward, we need to model the positive relationship between different people, the positive relationship between a diverse,
Right.
between diverse characters. And
Right.
so I had done a lot of focus on Southern history, Southern politics, Southern literature. And so that was my background. And so he asked me, and Mr. James Boyd, for those who don't know, Mr. James Boyd was an African-American male. And I sat across from him and we talked about it. I think it's important to note that I took the position from a teacher who was African-American. And I remember a conversation with my class where, we talked about the fact that I was white and I was teaching African-American Lit. I said, wait, hold on. I said, Miss Patterson was African-American. And y'all had no problem with her teaching British Lit. And British Lit is so white, it's clear. But y'all didn't have a problem, but you got a problem with me. And so, but anyhow, that was my background that took me into my first year of teaching. Since then, I've made the transition to higher education, and I've worked in lots of different roles. But I'm an educator at heart, and it all started with that first year at Kirby.
Awesome. And we're so glad that you chose to teach that class, because I can probably vouch for multiple students. You had such an impact on us. But it sounds like it sounds like, I think we were just thinking like they just planted you there. We was like, they just had to put somebody in there. So they just but it sounds like you had already had like a little bit of background, which I didn't know that. So that's interesting. Yeah, I definitely didn't know that. So so you kind of share with us a little bit about like how you arrived at Kirby. Could you tell us a little bit about like how, like right now you said you're in higher ed, right?
Correct.
So like, could you tell us a little bit about like your pathway to moving to the higher ed, and like what do you think is the biggest difference?
So I after teaching for 6 years, some things in life happened. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer and had a thyroidectomy. My stepbrother committed suicide, and my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so I needed to move back to Louisiana, which is home for me.
Right.
And so I went in September, and there were no teaching gigs available. And so I'm looking for anything. And I found a position at Nicholls State University working at the Louisiana Center for Dyslexia and Related Learning Disorders.
Right.
And I taught remedial English, and then I advised students and worked with them, and I tutored them. And so that was a good transition. I did that for a semester, and then I went to LSU to work in the School of Business as an academic advisor. And that, it was like, that is my mojo, being in that environment where students figure out who they are, what they want to be. And I have loved it. I've worked at LSU. I worked at Christian Brothers University in Memphis, and then now I work at Northeast Mississippi Community College. And I've worked in various roles. The ones that I feel like are my strengths are the ones where I'm working with students, and I'm building a relationship with them, because I think that's one of the things that I felt like this was not a job, just a job for me. At Christian Brothers University, they are a LaSallian institution. And what that means is that everybody deserves the opportunity for good quality education. St. John Baptist de La Salle was the patron saint of teachers, and he was from France, and he was the one who created the classroom setting.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, the people who could receive an education were those who were affluent because they could pay for a tutor. And so
Mm-hmm.
he created this classroom setting and promoted the idea that, everybody deserved that opportunity. And then at CVU, we promoted the idea that we were all teachers. And so, helping students figure it out. I mean, I had kids, Andrew, who sat in my office and they would say, Miss Kelly, I do not have, I do not, I do not have what it takes to go back to my home neighborhood. I'm not going back there. I want to do
Mm-hmm.
something different. And then just helping them have the skill set to attain the skill set, to choose the major, to get the job, to do what they wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
so that they could do something different with their lives and
Right.
not repeat past mistakes.
Right, right. And you know what I find fascinating about what you said? You said that, whether you were in the high school classroom or even on a higher ed, like you still in some ways were still trying to kind of help people find themselves or find um like almost like get a better idea of who they are. And what I thought about when you said that, I thought about in your class, like it was honestly the first class where we actually talked about race. Like that was one of the, it was insane, but it was like the conversations and the discussions that we had in this class, like it was like, oh shoot, you know what I mean? Like it was amazing. And I felt like in a way it kind of, I saw myself more in the text and things that we were reading. So I
Well,
definitely see it's a trend, huh? You're just gonna keep on doing it.
well, one of the things you were talking a lot about race.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I will never forget. I mean, I'm weird in that I can still see it now. Joy Reid was a student in my class, and she walked in, she dropped her backpack, and she said, so Miss Wildman, what do you think about the rebel flag? I was like, whoa, that was not on my agenda to discuss today, but okay. But that led to a 2-day conversation about race and about
Mm-hmm.
prejudice and about stereotypes and about racism
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of diversity and I mean we passed the box of Kleenex around. This was before Google, but every desk had a dictionary underneath, and I was like, get out the dictionary. You look up stereotype. You look up racism. You look up prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked about everything from um, well, let me go back. A lot of my students in that class, because I had 2 different sections of it,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of my students had been taught that racism was only white against black. They'd been taught that from their family because that was their family's experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, wait, hold on, y'all. Y'all thought I was a sub because, well, then everybody busted out laughing because they realized, oh, wait, that kind of was being a little bit
Mm-hmm.
prejudice. And so but we had hard conversations. We talked about prejudice within each community. And I remember walking through those steps and just going, Jesus, please give me wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to start anybody get mad or anything. I just want these kids to think
Mm-hmm.
this through. And students talking about within the African American community, and we had read A Lesson Before Dying
Mm-hmm.
by Ernest Gaines, who was one of my favorite people ever. But
Mm-hmm.
in that book, he talked about what it means to be a man. But there
Mm-hmm.
was a community within that context
Mm-hmm.
um, called Freela Cove, and they were the light-skinned African Americans. So
Mm-hmm.
we talked about that in our class, and we talked about the difference and the paper bag test at the Cotton Club in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked about um, red Kool-Aid, and I had no clue. And there was a guy, Henry Lee, I will
Mm-hmm.
never forget that,
Mm-hmm.
because they said, because, everybody thinks black people drink red Kool-Aid. I was like, what do you mean? And they said, everybody, we drink red Kool-Aid. And I said, what flavor's that? And if 30 kids can say red in unison, 30 kids said red. And I started
Uh,
laughing. But that was a great conversation. And I remember I felt so fulfilled as a teacher.
mm-hmm.
And I walked to Mr. Boyd. He was standing in the hall, and I said, I want you to know that this was the best day. And he told me, he said, Miss Wildman, on the first week of school, all but 2 parents from your African American lit classes called and said, get her out of there, get her out of there. And he said, I told them, give her a shot, give her a chance. And that was such a fulfilling and a rewarding experience for me. But, not every day was fabulous. You know, I mean, I'll be honest, some days I went home in tears, not because it was hard. No, I'm serious. I had students say things to me like, I'm contemplating suicide, or, I'm pregnant, and I told my mom, and she told me to have an abortion. And, those were things that I was like, I didn't have, I needed a little more, training on how to handle those types of situations.
Right.
And so those were the days that it was a little more difficult. And then Columbine happened during my first year teaching. And, I had always said, Lord, if you'll go with me, I'll go wherever you want me to go. And I won't be afraid. And it was like, okay, I'm kind of afraid now. And so, anyhow, but every year that I have been in education, I have realized that I'm where I need to be.
I love that. And one of the things that you said that you just said, it just slipped my mind. But I thought that was oh my gosh, it just completely slipped my mind. Two things you said.
Okay.
So 2 things you said. So one of them was that you said, I didn't necessarily have the training that like it's a whole nother layer of teaching that's just like that social and emotional and trauma. And I mean, it's just a whole nother layer there. But I also like want to say, like, I really admire like your courageousness to go there and like have the conversations, because I almost feel like the way that we facilitate those conversations, like we literally just listen to one another, and like everybody's just kind of listening, like understanding another person's perspective. But it's like that's kind of what it takes, those courageous combos to really move the needle around this idea of race. Like I think it's just so imperative.
Well, one of the things that when I was hired by Shelby County Schools, they gave us this shrink wrap book by I think his name was Henry Wong, that said first
Harry
days
Wong.
of school. Harry Wong.
Yes.
First days of school. I think mine's still in the shrink wrap, because he was very structured. And I mean, some people need that, but I just knew that wasn't me. I had a professor at LSU when I got my master's, and his name was Bill Pinar, and he taught me my first education class. And we talked about tearing up the lesson plan. And he didn't literally mean, tear up the lesson plan, but he talked about kind of investing yourself into what's happening in your classroom and giving that level of comfortableness to your students to where they feel like, okay, she's a little vulnerable, I can be vulnerable too.
Come on.
So I think that kind of having a classroom that's based on that culture allowed students. So when we were having the hard conversations, students felt like it's a safe place. And that was very important for me. I said that the N-word was not acceptable. And I said, I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what your ethnicity, what box you check. That is not acceptable. I said, because and I named one of the white classmates. I said, because if she called me a cracker, I would knock her out. And, just really, I said, yes, that's an offensive word to me. I don't care, but it's, but we set up a classroom that was based on respect. And I'm I wasn't perfect, believe me. There were some days where it's like, man, I would love a do-over for that. But I feel like in my classroom, whether it was at Kirby or at Germantown, or even, I taught an MBA program at CBU, I still wanted to provide that opportunity for students to feel like it was a safe place for them to grow and to express
Yes.
themselves. And I think English as a curriculum gave me that opportunity because so often my students would say, all right, what's the right answer? And I'd say, there's not a right answer. You tell me what the right answer is, but then you have to support it. You just can't pull something out of thin air.
Mm-hmm.
You decide what the right answer is, you support it, and
Mm-hmm.
then we'll go from there. But that was something that my curriculum allowed
Mm-hmm.
for.
Yes. And you know what I hear you say? Y'all heard it, people. Culture and safety. Like it's so important. Like that's one of the things I really advocate for in my book is that listen, man. Listen, you do all the tactical stuff, you do your lesson plan, you do all, but if that safety in the culture is not there in those relationships, it's gonna be really hard to teach. Like it's gonna be challenging because I've been reading this book, Culturally Responsive Teaching, and literally the science, like scientifically, we need to feel safe for us to show up and
Right,
learn. Like it's
right,
just as human beings in general, which I thought was like, oh, this is like scientific facts. Like, yeah, we need
right.
safety, and it just
Dr.
go ahead.
I was going to say, Dr. Brene Brown has a book called The Gift of Imperfection. And I
Mm-hmm.
really like that book. One of the things that she says is that we talk about fitting in, but people don't really want to fit in. They want to belong. And,
Mm.
they want somebody to um, you know, Dr. Brown's research is a lot on vulnerability
Yes, I
and being
love it.
courageous enough
Yes,
to
I
be
love
vulnerable.
her. Yes, I love me some
And
Brene. Yes.
yeah, and so I think when as a teacher, if you walk into that and create that environment where students feel like they belong in their most vulnerable, you know, at their most vulnerable point, which, in high school, that's a pretty big
Right.
time in your life where you're trying to figure out who you are. And in
Mm-hmm.
college as well, they may not feel that way on the campus all the time, but if they
Right.
feel that way in your office or they feel that way in your classroom, then
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be able to teach not just your content. you
Yes.
know it's
Yes.
Dr. Angelou's, people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care.
And it's
And
a
so
real simple thing. I mean, you spot on. It's a real simple thing, but it's like it requires, we're dealing with human beings. At the
right,
end of the day, we are not just teaching math or English or African American lit, like we're teaching human beings. So
right.
it's that's really impactful. Okay, so
One of the wait,
go
let me
for it.
say one quick thing.
Go ahead.
We're
Hit me
talking
with it.
about
Hit me with it.
training,
Mm-hmm.
and I got my master's in curriculum and instruction,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the courses that I had to take to get my teaching license was adolescent psychology. And
Mm.
I feel like that class, more than any of my education classes, Lord forgive all of my education. I mean, those classes were helpful, but the most helpful to me was the adolescent psych.
Hello, you heard it, people. It is more to teaching than just your subject. It is you are dealing with human beings, psychology, care, emotions, self-awareness, soft skills. Go to mentalfitness.com/rookies and learn all about that. Holla at me. Okay, so now, okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. You sound
Sure.
like you have done a lot in education thus far. Like, what do you think is the most essential piece of information that a new teacher absolutely 100% needs to know?
Um, do your best. You won't screw up the kids. I promise. If you are doing your best, you will not wreck them. Period.
Mm-hmm.
I think too often new teachers and their zealousness, they don't realize that they're not the only influence in the kid's life.
Mm-hmm.
They want to change the world, and that's great and that's awesome, but that can be overwhelming. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would encourage all new teachers uh, to recognize, that there's nothing that if you are trying your best, that you are not going to screw up these kids.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing is pace yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I was a new teacher in a new city. I was single. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a husband, didn't have kids. I stayed up at Kirby High School in P1 and
Mm-hmm.
graded papers.
Mm-hmm.
for hours on end, and I could dedicate a whole lot
Mm-hmm.
to um, to my job.
Right.
But there were some days where it's like, I cannot, I have got to have a mental health day. I have got to stay in bed. I have got to, I
Right.
need to do. And for me, oftentimes that was, I would go to Louisiana to see my family, and I would leave on a Friday, and it gave me a long weekend.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think that's important to pace yourself,
Mm-hmm.
recognize that you may need to take a mental health day,
Mm-hmm.
and also recognize that you aren't the only influence.
Mm.
You're not going to screw up your kids.
Mm. Wow, wow. And I really love that, because I do see often new teachers put a lot of pressure on themselves. Like they just put this weight on the world. Like I had a webinar last week, and this one teacher I was working with, she was like, "Man," she's like, "I really like this online thing. It stressed me out." She's like, "I don't know." She's like, didn't do anything." You know what I mean? Because they putting so much pressure on themselves. But like you said, it's just doing your best,
Right.
and teaching it to me is a unique thing. It's like a lot of it, it's like on the job training. You figure it out, you be like, "Whoop, well, I screwed that up. Not gonna do that next period. That didn't work."
Right.
so,
Right.
so the mistakes are really what make you amazing at what you do. Like that's really how you grow as an educator. To me, I mean, I don't know. That's how I feel. I feel like I learned the most from when I jacked it up. Like that was just me.
Well, and there were days when, you jack it up, you teach the same thing 4 times, and it might have worked for first and second period,
Yes.
but fifth and sixth, it's not working. So you got to change it. I remember, so when I had my thyroid cancer, I had a thyroidectomy, and for like 6 months after that, they were trying to regulate my
Mm-hmm.
thyroid level. And,
Mm-hmm.
not to go into a big science lesson, but
Mm-hmm.
that's a pretty big deal. And you could be a little bit kind of irritable and, maybe a little snappy. And so,
Right.
one of my students, he had me the year before for 10th grade. This was at Germantown. He
Uh-huh.
had me for 10th grade. His name's Anthony White. He had me
Okay.
for 10th grade English at second period. Well,
Mm-hmm.
then the next year for 11th grade English, he had me for seventh period.
Mm-hmm.
And just second period versus seventh period in your day and the day of your students is completely and totally different. But he said something to me, and I looked at him and I said, "Anthony," he said, "Miss Wyman, you're just different. You're different this year." And I said, "Anthony, I'm chemically unstable." Well, when I said that, just deadpan to him, he was like, "Oh my goodness." And I laughed and I said, "No, they're trying to get my thyroid hormone regulated." I said, "So I may be a little snappy and I apologize." I said,
Right.
"But you have to understand, you had me at second period when y'all were still kind of waking up and all that. Now you
Right.
got me at seventh period. There are
Uh-huh.
more people in this classroom. We had,
Right.
25 last year. This year we are 32, and we have
Ooh.
different personalities, and that changes the dynamic.
Right, right.
But that was sometimes you would, there were some liberties that I could take with a second period class because of who was in the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
the time of day it was. But
Right.
then, it's like, I can't do this at seventh period.
Yes.
So I remember one story we were reading was on, oh golly, I think his name is Tim O'Neill, but I would have to look it up to be certain. But he wrote a short story about the Vietnam War, and the main character died of a heart attack in the Vietnam War. And that's not something that you expect to hear, a casualty from a heart attack, but he was so
Mm-hmm.
afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started teaching, and I walked into it with some assumptions because I knew what the Vietnam War was. I assumed that my
Mm-hmm.
students would know.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. Again,
Mm-hmm.
this was before Google,
Mm-hmm.
before technology in the classroom.
Right,
So
right.
I said, "Hold on one second." I sent a note with the kid to the library. I said, "Can we come in? We need to do this. We need to figure out
Mm-hmm.
what this is." So, the morning classes, they were great. The afternoon classes, it was like, okay, this isn't working as well. So I hauled them all the way back to my classroom, I
Right.
got some books and I brought them to my class because, they still needed to do the research, but I couldn't do it in the library with them. They were maybe possibly acting a little bit of a fool. And so, but you figure that out. Now, that was a couple years in. So
Right.
maybe as a first year teacher, I might have pressed on with them acting a fool in
Right.
the
Right.
library. But you figure those things out.
Right. Right. I just want to say this. I feel like somebody needs to do a study on 6th and 7th period, because since I taught, every year my 6th and 7th period, we did not get along. Like we did not get along. I don't know. Somebody needs to do a research or study on that. But the other thing that I hear you saying is like knowing your audience. Like you really got to take the time to understand like what works in 6th may not work in 2nd. So just being flexible and adaptable too, based on who's in front of you. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
Right.
still, we're still gonna get this work. We still about to learn about the Vietnam War. We still gonna hold this
Right.
bar high, but we may just do it a little
Right.
differently. That's all.
Exactly.
Now this is the question I have, because I remember in this class, it was like we were just hanging on to every word. Like we were all so engaged. And I find that I don't know if I had many classes like that where I just wanted to come all the time, and oh my gosh, I love school. So what did you do to keep us all engaged? Because remember, now we looking at this lady like, who is about to teach me about some African American lit?
Well, I I think, one of the things that I did was that I properly prepared. I knew that if I stood in front of a group of teenagers and I was not prepared, they would eat me alive. And so, and again, like I said earlier, I was fortunate enough to only have myself to worry about. And so I could, dedicate the time to properly
Mm-hmm.
prepare. So I
Mm-hmm.
think, that was one of the things that, you know, some of your classmates might not agree
Mm-hmm.
with you about y'all hanging on my every word.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried to do that. And then also I tried to to build common ground. And
Mm.
I remember one conversation in that African American lit class. We were talking about, having more things in common with y'all
Mm-hmm.
than an African American teenager from New York.
Mm.
Because I said, how many of you, your parents or your grandparents, picked cotton? And a bunch of kids raised their hand, and I said, me too.
Mm-hmm.
And we did the soul food feast, and
I
I
remember
remember
that.
I made
That was fun. So
red
much
beans and
fun.
rice and cornbread, and they're like, "You cooked that?" I said, "Yes." Oh, but that was one of the things I learned about that. Somebody said, I'll bring some spaghetti," and I said something about that being a main entree, and they're like, "No, Miss Wyman, that's a side dish." I was like, "Okay, learned something
Right.
new." But that was, I think, kind of trying to build the common ground, being prepared. Um, those were the things that I think helped me to be more successful. Um, Also, I think sometimes we watched Amistad,
Mm.
and that was not an approved movie.
Mm.
So I might get myself in trouble now, but maybe there's a statute of limitations on when they can get me. But
Right.
I mean, I stood in front of the TV with my folder, and when the things would come
Oh yeah.
on the screen, that like the naked people, it was important to me that everybody in that classroom see that movie. Had just come out on video,
Mm-hmm.
and we needed to have a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we need I think a lot of the students in that classroom needed to have a conversation with me. I think for a lot of them, I was representing all white people, and
Mm.
we needed to be able to have that conversation. And we had to respect each other, and we did that.
Mm-hmm.
um, but I think the fact that I said, y'all, you can't tell anybody about this movie
Mm-hmm.
because it's not an approved movie, I think that kind of gave me a little credibility with them.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
she
the
said
cool
it.
teacher. She the cool teacher.
but common ground, being prepared, those are the things that I feel like built the relationship with my
Mm-hmm.
students, and there was a culture of safety in our classroom.
She keeps saying that safety, 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 and it definitely felt that way. Like, I mean, it felt that way. The teachers that I remember the most, I mean, I think that they were vulnerable, and I felt safe to be vulnerable too. Like, I felt
Right.
okay to make a mistake, or I felt okay because I was kind of a quiet kid, so I didn't really like to ask questions or talk that much. Jen was more of a, like, she was, like we talked about when we were preparing, like Jen was more of a, like, she was social, all, and I was kind of like to myself, like, I'm just about to play this basketball, that's it, I don't really have to talk to people. But
You were the mean mugging.
come on, I was not the mean mug. Y'all hear this? Was I a mean mug? I think I was just quiet. I've heard that before though. That's not the first time I've heard that. I've heard that like last year sometime. They were like, smile, it's not that bad. I was like, wait a minute, I'm not even mad. Like, what's up with this? Okay, so
Right.
yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your first year. Okay, so let's
Okay.
talk about your first year. Like, how was that transition? Like, were there points where you were like, you know what, I'm out of here? Or was it like, what worked for you, what didn't?
Okay. So when I got my master's degree,
Mm-hmm.
my major professor was an amazing woman, but she told me, she's like, Kelly, you're going to want to cry and want to quit every day until Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said, then, things will turn and
Mm-hmm.
then you'll love it. And then by about, the first part of May, you're ready to send them home for the summer.
Right, right.
And so I walked into the classroom and I was like, all right, I'm ready for me to not like it, but I loved it.
Mm.
Um, it was an amazing, I mean, I just loved it. I loved what I taught. I remember discussions about um, Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal,
Mm-hmm.
where students, I'm teaching them irony and satire, and I'm also manipulating them into having them think that I really believe that eating kids is the answer. I don't.
Right,
Disclaimer,
right.
that was, but
Uh-huh.
having them involved. And I remember as a new teacher, I did not have, cool things in my classroom. And I wanted them to take, to go one at a time and listen to each other and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were throwing a roll of toilet paper, and you could not talk unless you had the roll of toilet paper in your hand. But
Mm.
we were listening to each other and talking. Same, with when we had the conversation in African American Lit. Um, I remember we read a book called Clover in African
Mm-hmm.
American Lit,
I
and
remember that.
talked about an interracial marriage, and this was in 1999, and not everybody in the classroom was real comfortable with that, and how are we gonna? But
Mm-hmm.
this woman brought this into our classroom, and we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyhow, I thought, that something must be wrong because I love it every day.
Mm.
But I just feel like that was, that you're in the right place.
Mm.
I mentioned Columbine happened in my first year of teaching.
Mm.
I had a student, share with me that she was, gonna, her mom was forcing her to have an abortion. That was
Mm.
difficult.
Mm.
How I'm very much pro-life, and how do I wrap my brain around that?
Mm-hmm.
I had a mother come to me at graduation and hug me and say, "We're here because of you, because my child was suicidal."
Ooh.
So those were the difficult moments, but the great moments were when my students would get it. It's like
Mm.
that's the point.
Mm-hmm.
When they wrote something and they were proud,
Mm-hmm.
when they found their voice.
Oh, did I freeze? I think I froze. Am I freezing? I think I froze.
I enjoyed it. I loved what I did. I loved
Mm-hmm.
I loved teaching.
Mhm.
and that was a great time for me.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, because of me being an employee of Shelby County Schools, only stayed at Kirby for a year, and then I transitioned to Germantown, and so I had to learn Germantown and the
Mhm.
students. I mean, it was Germantown was a much more diverse
Mhm.
school as far as different nationalities. We had, I believe, we had like 20 plus different ethnicities represented in our student population,
Mhm.
and so um, I had to make that transition, learn a lot of things. And I was a floating teacher. That's the pits for any teacher who has to go from room to room to room for 7 class periods. Um, hats off to you, because that
Mhm.
was before you had your tunes on your phone. And, I'm carrying the boom box to 7 different buildings, and, trying to figure out the politics of space.
Mhm.
When you go into somebody's classroom, am I going to
Mhm.
be welcomed? Am I going to be given space? And so
Mhm.
that was an interesting thing. And then, one of my highlights, the highlights for me and all of my years for teaching, and I know this sounds kind of probably weird, but I loved going to prom, because
Mhm.
I feel like my students were proud.
Mhm.
They were all dressed up, they were in their fancy duds,
Mhm.
and they wanted to take pictures with me. They wanted to introduce their dates to me. That,
Mhm.
that was a really proud moment for me. I did it my first year at Kirby, and I was like, okay, this is something, because I did it then because I taught 12th grade. And it's like, oh,
Mhm.
these are all of my kids.
Mhm.
And then, when I went on to Germantown, I taught ninth through 12th grade. But I found it was like, okay, these are kids that I'm not even teaching, but they know who I am, and
Mhm.
they want me to meet, um, their boyfriend or the kid from church or whatever that they brought to prom. So
Mhm.
that was an important lesson that I learned in my first year, was that would be important to kids.
Yeah. And I just want to say, like, when you were telling me the story about the student telling you the parent telling you at graduation, that just gave me chills. I mean, that just gave me chills. Like, it is fascinating to me that one person can have so much impact on, like, literally change the entire trajectory of somebody's life. Like, they were like, I'm done. And you just gave like that little ounce of hope, and it furthermore reiterates like the importance of a teacher is not just teaching. Like, we have a huge responsibility when we stand in front of kids every day. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's
And
just
an awesome opportunity,
mhm.
because that specific young man, he was in school suspension.
Mhm.
And I don't even remember why he was in school suspension, but one of my assignments when you got into in school suspension was you had to write an essay on why you were there, what
Mhm.
got you there, what behaviors you were going to change so that you didn't get back there again, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And it was in that essay that he said, I don't think I can go on. I've disappointed my mom, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And, my immediate thing was I went to the guidance counselor's office. I made a copy of the letter. I gave it to her. And then I said, I'm going to respond to him. And she said, okay. And I made a copy of my response and gave that to her. And I gave that to him because one of my responsibilities was sitting in the ISS room for part of fourth period while the one person went to lunch. I would sit in
They
there.
gave you
We
that
had to,
duty too? Dang.
oh yeah. So anyhow, um, but that most of the time that was not a big deal. But he was in there and he was embarrassed, and so anyhow, I gave him my response,
Mhm.
and I just saw a change in him, and I don't think that was the only thing
Mhm.
that happened. I do
Mhm.
know that the guidance counselor contacted his mom, because
Mhm.
when a student says something like that, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to
Mhm.
really respond appropriately. And so, but she did. She said that to me at graduation, and I'd never forgot it.
Wow, that is so powerful. And this is the other thing that I hear with your response to that. I think that oftentimes, like, we just send kids out of class, we put them in ISS, and by you giving them an opportunity to really reflect on, like, okay, this is, because we're human beings. I mean, you're 15, 16. I mean, shoot, we've all been there. You'd be like, you know what? I didn't think that thing all the way through. Like, like, we have all
Right.
been like 15 before, and we've done some crazy things. Like, we're human beings. We mess up sometimes. So just that reflection piece, and it what it makes me think about? It makes me think about that prison that pipeline to prison, that people talk about. Is
Right.
that, are we reforming people? Are we really giving people a time to, like, really think about what it is that they're doing so that we don't do it again? Or are we just saying, like, we're going to banish you to ISS and that's it? Or in a suspension, send you home. You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing to
Right.
really help
Yeah.
so we don't make those same errors? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. We want to reduce recidivism. And since you brought up the prison population, I will give a shout out to Northeast Mississippi Community College, where I am currently employed. We have a jails to jobs program, and we work with the Alcorn County Correctional Facility here in Northeast Mississippi. And we teach them some skills, and we teach them some college level classes, English classes, and actually the instructor of the English class, she also does a poetry program with the prisoners. But initially, when it was brought up to me, I was a little bit like, oh, I don't know. But I became one of the strongest advocates for the program, because when we went to the graduation, those prisoners, you could tell they were so proud that they had done something positive. They had accomplished something. And so I'm also a member of the Shakespeare Club here in Alcorn County in Corinth. And I had to do a program, and I did one on there are a lot of prisons in our country that do programs centered around exposing prisoners to Shakespeare and who he was, the bard, who he was. And they have been able to do research, and they have seen a reduction and reincarceration. The recidivism is that they're not coming back. And so I believe that education is an opportunity to change lives. So back to your comment about the pipeline. And then also I was going to say, I'm, once an English teacher, always an English teacher. So when I transitioned to LSU and to CVU, if a student failed out and they needed to appeal that, they appealed to me. And I always made them do what got you here, what behavior you're going to have to change. We're going to have this conversation, because this is not about, you coming back and wasting my taxpayer money if you got student aid, or your mama's money, or, whatever. But I do have one quick funny story. I know that we're coming towards the end, but one funny story. When I was at CVU, I had a mom call me, and she said, Dr. Hefner, can you tell me how much class my son is missing? And I said, well, because of the Berkeley Amendment and FERPA, I cannot give you that information, but he can come and sign a piece of paper that gives me the opportunity to talk to his professors. And, so she said, oh, he will come to see you the next day. I said, okay. So he came, he signed the piece of paper, and I reached out to his professors, and they said that, he had missed a lot of school. So I contacted Mom. Long story short, Mom did the math to figure out how much she was paying per hour that her son was supposed to sit in class. And for the days that he missed, he was going to have to pay her back by doing chores around her house. And so I asked him, I said, a couple of weeks later, I said, how are things going? He said, oh, I'm going to class, and the garage is painted, and the yard is mowed, and the shrubs are trimmed. But, sometimes that we don't always make the right choice initially, but if we can have a little help either through doing the reflection or maybe mama helping him do a little bit reflection and a little math, we can get that done.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing what can get you moving sometimes. Definitely
Yeah.
amazing. Okay. So one of the things that you have really highlighted today, like it's really important to take the time to understand students. Like what are some ways that you think that as a like 2 to 3 strategies as a teacher to help understand the words? Because I think that was like a really big piece. Like when I think about that class and that whole safety and just like what are some ways that a new teacher could do that? Like 2 to 3 strategies.
Um, so one of the things that I would say is Dr. Stephen Covey has the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Mm-hmm.
And in my career as an educator, I focused on 2 of those. One of them is begin with the end in mind, but the second one is listen to understand, not to be understood. And I think, that's one of the strategies that I would recommend is that, listen to your students. And then sometimes you have to listen and then do active listening, ask them questions, make sure you understand what they want, and then also make sure you understand what they're saying, but then what they intend and expect your response. I was an advisor, and so students would come to see me and they'd start telling me something, and I mean I would just start going 90 to nothing thinking about how can I fix this for them. And it's like, maybe I don't need to fix it. Maybe they just want to talk to somebody about it. So that would be, one of the things that I would encourage. A strategy would be to listen, to understand, and not just to respond, and not for you to be understood. That focuses on hearing what the student has to say. And that, I think, goes back to the safety thing. And then, another strategy that I would say is that see your students as people. Because one of the things that when I taught, I tried to go to ball games, I tried to go to plays, I tried to, Lord, I had sucker written on my forehead. I had more t-shirts, more mugs. Anything. The students knew that if they were selling something, Miss Wildman was buying.
Right.
So that was one of the things. I tried to figure out what was important to them. And then when I was at Kirby, they had a gospel choir. And my students said they knew that I liked Kirk Franklin. They heard me. Yakita Braden walked in my class and said, Miss Wyman, are you sanctified? I said, and filled with the Holy Ghost. Because when she walked in, I had Kirk Franklin going. And so
you sanctified.
Are you sanctified? I said, I'm filled with the Holy Ghost. But she, they asked me, would you be the sponsor for gospel choir? And I said, as long as I don't have to sing, and kind of laughed about that. They said, no, we just need somebody to be up here while we're practicing. And so then I went to the concert, and so that was something that was important to them. And seeing them as individuals. Sometimes if a student would tell me I work at this restaurant, I would go to that restaurant. That helped me understand, okay, they're working. And I had kids at Kirby that would work at FedEx, slinging boxes on the night shift, and then come to class and be in my second period class.
Wow.
And they had to do it to help support their family.
Wow.
So, kind of understanding that, having conversations, asking them a lot of questions, and seeing them as people outside of just being the student that's in my English class. I think those are 2 things that are really important.
You heard. So what I hear is LUFU. That's what I learned. I've been in relationship school this past year, and they call LUFU listening to the other person feels understood.
Yes.
That's a tool I'm still working on, but yeah, listening to the other person feels understood, but also taking a genuine interest in them too. Like I hear you saying that, like
Right.
t-shirts, ball games, because I think what you said also is like you understood the context of what they were, what they're experiencing. Like, I work late at night, I'm doing this, oh, I'm playing basketball, and like, so it helps you to have a stronger lens. It's like, yeah, instruction is my focus, but I'm also I'm seeing you as a human being, and
Right.
I can now understand, like, how can I best support you, what I
Right.
mean, and getting what you need.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Love that. Love that. Well, we are edging up on closing out, but is there one key point or takeaway that you'd like for the people that are tuning in, for them to take away from our conversation today? Is there one thing that you'd like for them to
Um,
take away?
a couple of just tidbits of
Mm-hmm.
wisdom that I would share for any new teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, don't always hang out in the teachers' lounge. When I started at Germantown, there were there were a couple teachers that uh, hung out there during lunch, and they were not positive. And I was still very much an impressionable teacher. And so a friend of mine said, "Why aren't you sitting in the teachers' lounge anymore?" I said, "Look, I love men and I love kids. I want some of my very own one of these days. But if I stay in that teachers' lounge, I don't know that I will." And we kind of
Right.
laughed about it, but we ended up eating lunch in her classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So be careful with that. And then you know that's probably one of the really important things. And then I would encourage um, new teachers to cut yourself some slack. I mean, I said that earlier, but you have chosen this profession. Um, I'm hoping not because you get summers off, because I used to say they give you summers off so you'll come back in the fall. But you've chosen this profession because you want to do something noble,
I
and
just
you
caught
want
that.
to,
They give you some
you
sauce
know,
because they know you'll come back in the fall. That's funny. Anyways, okay, go ahead.
right. Yeah, but I mean, when because come the end of school, it was like, "Well, I'm exhausted," and then but I think that's you've chosen this vocation, and it's a noble vocation, and it's a calling, I believe, and so just I would encourage new teachers to cut yourself some slack.
Mm, mm. So cut yourself some slack. And the first one, cut yourself some slack. And then the second one, what? I forgot the first one you said.
Don't always
Oh,
hang out in the teachers'
the
lounge if
teacher's
they're
lounge.
bitter,
That's it.
bitter
Yes.
people in there.
Yes. Be positive. Put yourself, hey, listen, they say you are an average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with.
Yes.
And it's true, because listen, you will take on what somebody else saying about another student, and they may not even be that way. But I totally agree with that. I absolutely
Right.
agree with that. So cut yourself some slack. Teaching, yes, it's that hard, except for Miss Wildman. Apparently, she was the only person I know,
No.
except for Miss
No, I
Wildman.
loved it.
Yeah. So, but let's right quick. I do want to hop to the comments and just see what
Sure, yeah.
some of our guests and what they were saying. Um, Rachel Embry, she just shared. She said, "I love this. Thanks for sharing." Let's see. Let's look at some of these comments. Oh, I can't see all of them. But 7 Habits. My mom said 7 Habits is great. Jen said she said she did. I don't know which part that was. But dang, it's quite a bit. It is a calling, and she has the calling as a teacher. Oh, that's so nice.
Oh,
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree, Miss Wellman. Absolutely, that's one of the best classes ever. One of the absolute best classes ever. I don't know how to read all these comments. Let me see. Maybe I can see them here. I don't know, but I can't see all of them. They just. But
let me see if I can.
yeah, maybe you can pull them up. I can't see all of them.
Okay. I can't.
It just says 21
No, I don't
comments.
think so.
Yeah, it just says 21
I
comments.
can't see the comments.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes, but that's okay. But thank you, Miss Wildman. So if people want to get in contact, listen, new teachers, I'm just telling you, she was the bomb. I couldn't even tell it was her first year. She'd be a great resource to talk to. But for those, if people want to connect with you, I keep calling you Miss Wildman, and you, it's Dr. Hefner. I've been calling you Miss Wildman, and you're a doctor?
Hey, I'm all right.
Dr. Hefner, I'm sorry. But yes, could you if people want to connect with you, where could they check you out?
Sure. You can email me at KEHEFNER@iCloud.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and then also on Facebook. I would be interested if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns. I would be happy to chat. It was truly the greatest joy to be in P1 at Kirby. I mean, it was there was nothing average about any day. It was an exceptional experience. So, but look, if you have questions, new teachers, I'm happy to do it. When we were prepping for this and talking about things, one of the things that I taught, I had a kid that walked in my classroom and said, I smoke cigars, wear an evening jacket, read poetry, and listen to classical music. I'm a gentleman. I was like, oh, buddy, it takes a whole lot more than that to make you a gentleman. And then I found some content to go along with that with Ralph Waldo Emerson. And that was the greatest thing, really helped me teach some soft skills and life lessons. Excuse me. So, yeah, but please feel free to contact me or contact Andrea and she can get in contact with me. But I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to relive some really amazing years of my life.
Yes, you were absolutely one of my favorite teachers, and that was one of my favorite classes. When we were getting ready for the interview, I was thinking about, like, when we got off, I was like, oh man, that I went to the National Civil Rights Museum like 1,000 times before that, but that particular time that I went, I learned so much more than I had like actually ever learned before. Like, the tour was, I mean, we just had so many unique experiences, and I just learned so much just about myself and my own race, for that matter, and it was just the first time that I experienced it. I think probably my entire high school, or my just entire career. So I'm so appreciative.
One of the things that I tried to share with y'all was, regardless of what you're studying, especially with something like, the humanities, English, literature, history, political science, things like that, I'm not going to tell you anything that, as thus saith Dr. Hefner or Miss Wildman. But what we're going to do is we're going to read it and we're going to respond to it. And if we read it and respond to it, then we'll learn from each other. And again, find that common ground, find a safe space in the classroom where you can express that, building on relationships with your teacher and also your classmates.
Yeah. And I mean, I know I'm gonna keep running my mouth, but you know what it makes me think about? So, I mean, I'm definitely not an ELA person by a long shot, but when like the ownership was definitely on us to do the learning. I mean, that's just what it was. And so when people are now talking about, oh, put the ownership on the kids, like I definitely had that experience in that class, and also in my guest next week, I kind of had that same experience. But I mean, that when they talk about putting the ownership on kids and like looking in the text and what are we discovering, what are we drawing from it, like we definitely, I think we got exposed to that experience in that class for sure.
Well, awesome.
Yes.
That was what I hoped.
Yes, you definitely did that. So thank you, Miss Wildman. It was a blast. I enjoyed chatting. This was awesome, awesome, awesome. And for those of you tuning in, I need you to go to mentalfitness.com/rookies. And I need you to cop that book, The Rookie's Playbook, to help you get right and tight for that first year. Because, hey, guess what? My inspiration is standing right here in front of me, guys. And I learned a lot from her. So thank you guys. Thank you, Miss Dr. Hefner, Dr. Wildman-Hefner, Dr. Hefner. Thank you for bringing your expertise and just sharing your story. And I'm so appreciative and so grateful. So thank you so very much.
And I'm happy to be here.
All right, awesome. Well, guys, we will see you next week for another edition, same time, Rookie Reset Sunday, and we'll be back with Miss Lovell, Kirby fam. Miss Lovell. All right. Well, we will see you guys next week and we'll talk soon. Turn the live stream. Did it end? Yes, it ended. Thank you so much, Miss Wildman. This was awesome.
You're welcome.
This was really good.
I had fun.
Good. Yes, awesome.
I couldn't see any of my notes.